Environment design is one of my favorite things to do. That's why I want everyone to enjoy this area of art. Learning to design places can be painfully slow at first. That's because learning anything requires a lot of focus on one single thing. And when it comes to environment specifically, they're really a combination of thousands of little elements and multiple choices that you need to make as an artist. For that reason, practicing it can feel like you're hitting the hardest speed bump in art. So in this video, I want to break down some beginner-friendly tips on how to start learning environment design, so that you don't get stuck in the beginning, and eventually we all will be able to explore those beautiful, exciting places that you already have in your mind. This is just about getting those things on the canvas and how to transfer those ideas for all of us to see. The most common problem I notice with concept art students when they start working on landscapes is that they zoom in way too close, way too early, and that they use absolutely teeny tiny little brushes. Not just two small brushes for beginning, but throughout the whole process they're using way too small brushes. Here we are going to hone in on the problem of how to get started without learning to paint absolutely everything at once. Because, let's face it, nobody can do that. Instead, we're going to use these tools to package the very essence of your location without letting those details take over at this step in the process. To put this in practical terms, I'm going to break down how I still use this in my current projects. So this is what I normally do at work. This is not just about practicing art. This is how you actually do it as a professional when working on concept art on a bigger project. When I start to design an environment for a client, I usually start with a concept image where the camera is pulled as far back as humanly possible. These usually take way less time, so they're ideal places to start on bigger projects. The fastness comes usually from the lack of 3-point vanishing points, because there's no fast way to make those. You are going to need to have a lot of planning and accuracy to pull that off. So this approach is perfect for getting that tone and mood down as early as possible. If you're just starting out, commissions are probably not really relevant yet, but they might be in the future. I just wanted to point out that in client projects, you as a concept artist can also suggest the kind of process that would be the most efficient for the project. If you can explain this in a way that this is going to be a faster approach, any reasonable client will understand that in the long run, this is also a more affordable option for them. So even if this approach is fast and very beginner friendly, it can work as a first step in larger productions as well. A big zoomed out establishing shot can get the whole team on the same page visually a lot more effectively than any isolated small scene can. It also allows me to throw in main color coding of an area, some geometric shapes as landmarks, and to suggest the look of architecture. This kind of shot doesn't have to be actual building design yet. Getting the mood right is way more important. Any smaller details can easily be figured out later with more detailed call-out drawings. Remember that a door or a roof shape, that is not the environment. An environment is where all of those details exist and what the impression of that whole place is. So try to see the forest from the trees. But even that advice feels like it needs to be more specific to be useful. If I just worked zoomed out, that still wouldn't make me paint any faster or force me to do any actual design work. And when I say environment design, I mean the look and feel of a scene that gives it a sense of place. One exercise I like to do with my own environments is to ask for directions in the place. How would a character, for example, advise me to get from point A to B in my scene? If I can imagine that conversation in my mind, then I know that this place has enough unique characteristics to be memorable and feel like a real place. Back when I started doing art, I used to think that design is easy, because we all have these great ideas in our head, and that rendering and details are hard. Now that I'm a bit older, I feel like design is definitely the hard part, and I'm not even that interested in rendering most of the time. This might be just my personal taste, but I'm drawn to the human touch the brushstrokes give to a piece. It's nice to let the viewer make those details in their head, at least in my opinion. That way the interaction between the viewer and the painting can be a very personal experience. As an artist, sometimes my job is to step away and let the painting do the talking. I try to remind myself with the best of my ability that this is not about me. I'm just a participant in the creative process. I don't need to, and I really shouldn't try to control every aspect of the piece. For that reason, I often limit the brush size I use in the painting. Note that this limit for the brush size is not a maximum brush size, but a minimum one. And this is the most important part of this video, so if there's one thing that you take away from this, please let it be this. The bigger brush you are using, the harder the painting will feel like at first, but it does keep things moving and the look of your work consistent. I love the addition of these size markers in Procreate. You can add or remove them by tapping this plus icon in the brush size and opacity sliders. By the way, when it comes to opacity, I'm using 100% opacity throughout this painting, and in most of my paintings, I almost always have the opacity at 100%. If I want to have transparency or blend colors, I have those features already built into my own process, but most of the time I'm painting at full opacity because that makes me make bigger, stronger decisions. If those decisions are wrong, the combination of these elements, the big process and the high opacity, the mistakes will be more obvious to me much earlier on. But if I have, for example, soft airbrushing brush marks that are at low opacity, there might be thousands of brush strokes that I just don't notice that they're the wrong ones because they don't generate enough contrast to scream out at me that fix these are in the wrong place or the wrong color. But a strong high opacity brush stroke, that I can see if it's a wrong decision in the wrong place. I use these markers as my limiter for the minimum brush size, so anything above this line is fine, but I try my best not to go below this line at all. And where you set your line depends of course on what brush you're using and what canvas size you're working with. Note that if you're working in any other program than Procreate, you can still have a minimum brush size. You just have to use other means to control that you don't go below that minimum line. If I increase the canvas size after the initial sketch, I always increase this minimum limit as well. That way I don't accidentally start drawing on a painting. For this painting, I'm using wet paper brush from Watercolors for Bears set. This brush has a lot of texture when I lighten up my pressure. Me choosing this specific brush doesn't matter. What matters here is why I chose this. I'm going to explain this so that you can apply this to whatever tools you're already using if you want to try this technique. Because of the texture, especially when I'm using this brush lightly, this is a high character brush. As such, it is not ideal for painting tiny little details. By choosing a high character brush, I'm taking out the option of getting too fussy with the details too early on in the process. When I place the brush strokes on canvas, I need to think about their purpose in the context of the whole painting. Because this wet paper brush makes me do longer, bolder brush strokes to get a line down, otherwise it's just a smudge. I need to think about the direction of each brush stroke to divide the painting into brushstroke groups. Here in the middle, I have vertical brushstrokes. At the sides, I have the squiggly lines, and down below on water, I have horizontal brushstrokes. This sort of grouping makes the illustration easier for a viewer to watch because it's easier to take in what you're seeing. Even if there's detail in one area of the painting, if it's all the same kind of detail, then it's kind of easier for the brain to process. Squiggly lines are here, got it. I can move on to the other areas of this painting. I've said this before, but what you want your viewers to think when they see your picture, you want them to think that they are good at looking pictures. That might sound silly, but try to apply this in your illustration and you will see how it affects the readability of your piece. If these sort of restrictions, like brush size or opacity, feel like annoying hindrances to your art, then I don't recommend trying this approach. But if you can frame it like you're giving yourself more powerful design tools, then I highly recommend trying this approach. You will also improve your brushstroke placement in the process for free, so that's a win-win situation in my book. As an added bonus, you will also get lost in your own worlds that nobody else would be creating without you. Also, the rest of us really want to see those places, so please share and publish your work when it's done. To fine-tune these skills to a more advanced next step, I recommend watching this video. There, I talk about the importance of brush selection and how you can use that as part of your storytelling. For channel members, there are also these live lesson art assignments. I recommend doing them to improve your composition skills and try new approaches to making art. This painting started out as a live lesson too, and there you can see the bulk of this painting in real time. I'm Mikko. Let's continue this conversation in the next one.